Yeah, I
That's
just
not
used to
true.
put it. I don't know why I'm putting it up.
What are you talking about?
I'll get the beat up.
Because you think it's easy to swim.
Privilege.
You stop throwing them in
All right. You're all good. All right.
I'm also.
All right, so folks, we are beginning first and foremost. We're going to start with some gratitude, some announcements, and some updates. First and foremost, with gratitude, we want to thank the People's Forum for hosting us today. David, you're here. We're going to clap it up for you, David. About Boricua invasion of the People's Forum, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in the announcement. So thank you for the People's Forum for being an open space for us to be able to talk this talk, walk this walk, and just bring a free Puerto Rico to fruition today. Again, I'll talk a little bit about why I'm talking so much about the PF and what's happening today a little bit later. We want to thank New York Boricua Resistance, La Colectiva Solidaridad, and Call to Action on Puerto Rico for being, making our panel today, coming to share their perspectives from the diaspora on what's happening in Puerto Rico. I want to thank all of you for coming here today. Today, for some reason, the universe aligned and there's 2 or 3 Puerto Rico events taking place and something going on for Cuba and Venezuela, and there's a lot going on, and I want to thank all of you for choosing us today, coming here and spending time with us. We'll try to keep it as loving, welcoming, and as supportive as possible. I know we're all triggered with the desks and the chairs, and it's very school. Trust me, it'll be very fun. It'll be very good. And if you don't like it, I'll send you to the principal's office. So, a couple of announcements. If you look in your packet, oh wow, this is cool. If you look in your packet, you'll see that there is a flyer next week here at the People's Forum at 3 o'clock. Dragons Spitting Fire. We are having the Jericho Movement New York City chapter is having a poetry afternoon. Revolutionary poets, one of which is a Boricua. Some of you know Rafael Landrón, a well-known author, professor at Boricua College, and member of the ProLibertad Advisory Board. There's going to be amazing poetry, and we're going to be talking about what's happening with a lot of U.S. held political prisoners, what's happening with Mumia, Leonard Peltier, what's happening with Eric King, what's happening with a lot of political prisoners. And there's going to be a lot of culture and poetry. So join us next Saturday from 3 to 5. ProLibertad is a proud member of the Jericho movement. Jericho, just 10 seconds, is a national coalition of organizations and individuals that do work around all the cases of political prisoners in the United States. Remember, there's over 200 political prisoners, Black Panthers, members of the BLA. We have Ana Belén Montes, a prisoner of conscience. There are folks who were in the Animal Liberation Front, the Earth Liberation Front. There's a lot of folks, some of the folks who were doing work around DAPL, the water protectors and all that. There's a lot of people in prison right now for their political convictions. So we're going to be talking about all of them 3 to 5. If you love revolutionary poetry, you're going to be here next week, next Saturday, 3 to 5. Another announcement, Cuba is near and dear to many of our hearts. And the Venceremos Brigade is organizing their 51st annual brigade. We have not been able to go to Cuba in the past 2 years. We are not going this year in the fall. So if you're interested in coming with us in a brigade to go see what the revolution is about and speak to people about the revolution and not hear from folks from Miami and folks who don't know what they're talking about, folks who are living, 50, 60, 70 years in the past, please check out vb4cuba.com and apply. And if you can't go to Cuba this year, look for a young person, a queer person, a person of color, someone that needs to go to the revolution. One of the great things about the brigade is that we're destroying that stereotype that the Cuba Solidarity activist is the cisgendered white older male that's 18 to 54. We're destroying that idea that that's the Cuba Solidarity activist that comes from the United States. So folks, vb4cuba.com, please come with us. Today, part of the Boricua invasion, at 6 o'clock, We Still Here. It's a documentary about Puerto Rico made by Puerto Ricans for Puerto Ricans. That's very rare these days. We're all having West Side Story flashbacks. and twitching and having issues. So today, that award-winning documentary is gonna be shown here at 6 o'clock. So it's Saturday night, everyone wants to go see a movie. Don't go see Batman or Sonic the Hedgehog or Fantastic Beasts, The Secrets of Dumbledore. Don't see any of those. Come here, 6 to 8 o'clock and support, okay? Couple of announcements. Those were your announcements. Update. Some of you might be noticing that we have a old ProLibertad banner. It has Ana Belén Montes, prisoner of conscience, and now Nina Dros Franco. Ben, why are you using that banner? Nina Dros got out 2 or 3 years ago. The reason why I brought it out and we're using it now is because Nina Dros Franco was rearrested in January. The situation around her case is very complicated and information is not getting to us the way it needs to, but ProLibertad's digging and we are figuring out why Nina has been arrested. What I will say is in the 2 or 3 years that Nina Dros Franco has been on parole, her experience on parole has been very negative. Why? Because she had a very public case that was very much showing the corruption in the Puerto Rican Police Department. So Puerto Rican police have made her parole very, very difficult. She was arrested. They're using the concept, whenever you're on parole, that violation of parole thing can be used against you for anything. So if you look at a cop the wrong way, or you do something that allegedly is not what you're supposed to do, they'll find a reason to put you back in prison. We are currently going to be working on a campaign to re-educate people around Nina's case. Next week is May 1st. Next week will probably be like the 5th or 6th anniversary of her arrest, her initial arrest. So we are bringing back Nina Dros, that image, that story, and we'll be talking more about it. You want more information? ProLibertad's on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we have our website, prolibertad.org.com. You have all the literature in front of you. You have our newsletter. You have our new campaign brochure with all of our social media. Go to YouTube, ProLibertad TV. What is happening in Puerto Rico? We put together this panel and we're going to get into it in 10 seconds because when most people think about Puerto Rico, they're thinking about that's the homeland of Lin-Manuel Miranda. That's the homeland that created J-Lo. Yeah. And Puerto Rico is just like this floating Miami in the Caribbean where you get to go and you don't need a passport, you don't need a visa, you can speak English there, you can spend American dollars, and it's a great place to go to for your little, your destination wedding and your weekend getaway, and it's spring break and I want to go somewhere in the Caribbean, but I don't want to be around folks who don't speak English. So that's what the public image is of Puerto Rico. They don't talk about the gentrification, the cryptocurrency warlords that are going to Puerto Rico and carving everything up. They don't talk about the depopulation of small towns. They don't talk about the forced migration that our people are facing. They don't talk about the incredible unemployment, the American Union colonialism. They don't talk about any of that. So we, as a diaspora-based organization, are going to talk about all of those things, and we're going to raise consciousness. So getting to our incredible panel, we're going to start off with Christopher from New York Boricua Resistance. Let's clap it up for Christopher.
Hi, so boom. My name is Chris. I go by he, they pronouns. I'm the co-chair for local work at New York Boricua Resistance. We're a mass organization that was created in 2019, and we follow 4 basic guiding principles. The first one is decolonization. The second is liberation as a human right. The third is diaspora as part of the struggle. And the last one is international solidarity. Today, I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to start off the conversation talking about the basic aspects of the colonial situation currently in Puerto Rico, which is La Junta, and how La Junta has influenced certain sectors of Puerto Rico to be on a decline. So specifically, I'm going to be talking about the electric system through Luma and how it has affected workers in Puerto Rico. All right, so first is La Junta, also known as the Financial Oversight and Management Board of Puerto Rico. So La Junta Control Fiscal is a government institution that was instituted in 2016 through the PROMESA Act, signed by President Obama. La Junta has the power to. La Junta has the power to make financial decisions in Puerto Rico and has the power to overshadow decisions made by local and national governments in the archipelago. It's composed of 7 members who are appointed by the President of the United States. These members are not elected and they are unaccountable. Later on, I'm going to give an example about how they, like I said, they're able to supersede the decisions made by the government because they have that much power. They were created to address the debt that Puerto Rico has. In a couple of slides, I'm going to talk about that as well. But the way they are doing that is to forget about the interests of the Puerto Rican people and do anything that is specifically going to resolve the so-called debt that we owe. So here is some screenshots from the website of La Junta. There's 7 members on the bottom and 1 filled executive position right now. There's 2 positions that's not filled. In the next slide, I'm going to talk about in a second. On the bottom left, we have David Skeel, who is a bum. He justifies his involvement in La Junta with Manifest Destiny, saying that it is his Christian duty to help Puerto Rico the way God intended it. He's been a member since 2016, so career politician over here, career Junta guy. Next, we have Andrew Biggs, who is also a bum. He's part of the neoconservative think tank American Enterprise Institute. He's basically one of those conservatives that hate social services like SSI, Medicaid, food stamps, etc. Then we have Arthur Gonzalez. You guessed it, another bum. And he's ugly. You can see right there. He looks mad ugly. He is a judge, and he has served on the U.S. Bankruptcy Court. Next up, we have Antonio Medina, who is the president of. You know you can't read your handwriting. He's president of Something About Strategies. I'm sorry. I think it's Convergent or Commercial Strategies in Puerto Rico, which specializes in corporate strategy and real estate development. I couldn't find in the time that I prepared this presentation information on John Nixon or Justin Peterson, but Betty Rosa is the president of SUNY and the Commissioner of Education in New York City. We got some honorable mentions. Natalie Carrasco, who is a bum. She served as Ukraine's Minister of Finance, where she implemented one of the biggest IMF plans in order to screw over the Ukrainians. She herself is a Ukrainian. She was given a $625,000 salary when she was the former executive director of La Junta. And then we have Pedro Pierluisi, who is
The biggest problem.
the biggest bum. He was the former attorney for La Junta and is the current governor of Puerto Rico. So La Junta was created for the debt, but in order to understand why it was created, there needs to be some context, some historical context. Puerto Ricans since 1947 have become more and more dependent on U.S. corporations because of a program called Operation Bootstrap. In 1947, should have wrote it on my notes. There was some law that was passed that incentivized corporations to move into Puerto Rico to take advantage of the cheap labor. Where are my notes? Right. Specifically, in the beginning, there was the advancement of the pharmaceutical industry. And if you know about Operation Bootstrap, then you also know about La Operación. And so you know how the pharmaceutical industry in Puerto Rico was used to sterilize Puerto Rican women, causing less babies. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. So eventually, during the, Clinton administration, Clinton erased these tax incentives, and so corporations started to pull out of Puerto Rico. So these tax breaks started to not exist anymore. And so as corporations were pulling out, there wasn't a lot of local businesses created during this time because the corporations were taking over. And so there wasn't enough money to sustain Puerto Rico's infrastructure. So there was a financial collapse in 2006. The vulture funds, specifically Barclays, Santander, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley, took advantage of this, knowing that Puerto Rico can't pay back their debt that they accumulated through taking out bonds in Wall Street. So these vulture funds made them take out more bonds that were high interest rates and had no taxes. Boricuas had to like forego their pensions, forego their savings and their retirement in order to pay for this debt. And now eventually you have President Obama signing Promesa to institute La Junta to address the $74 billion illegal and unaudited debt. So what does La Junta do? They do a lot of bullshit. They cut pensions, they fill the pockets of a few people. As you saw earlier, the executive director of La Junta made $625,000. Who knows how much the next one's gonna make? And who knows if the 7 board members don't make any money, you know? They've closed 253 public schools. They've closed hospitals. They sell public land, such as parts of Yunque, which is the national rainforest in Puerto Rico. They have refused wage increases. They've used Hurricane Maria relief to pay back some of the debt. Because of these things, they're forcing migration to happen. They've given a $1.5 billion contract to Luma, which is the privatized electrical company. And they've also privatized other public resources, land, electricity, etc. In this video, I'm about to show you, it doesn't load here, but it loads there. That's the real. So in this video, I'm going to show you is the sound on? Oops. 1 segundo. The sound is not on. Okay, is that person's name David?
I think you can click the corner.
Oh, okay. I can't see that. Thank you.
No, not here, but on the left.
We got sound. I'm a millennial. I know how to use technology. All right. Okay, so I'm just gonna show you a brief snippet.
Blue Mountain Capital owns $400 million of bonds issued by the island energy company PREPA. PREPA tried to restructure its debt in order to stay operational, but Blue Mountain immediately sued Puerto Rico to make sure the hedge fund was paid first.
Puerto Rico's debt problem has gotten so dire, the power authority cut off a hospital that's behind on its bill.
Closing a hospital in Guayama, they were unable to pay their electric bill, so the electric company ordered to shut down the hospital.
When we look at what we've built at Blue Mountain, we're proud across the board of our performance. Very excited about the opportunities for a long time to come.
Vulture funds are demanding to receive an estimated 244% profit before the Puerto Rican government is able to fund public health services like Medicaid.
The financial crisis has affected all of us. One government agency can't pay the hospital can't pay suppliers, then you don't get enough equipment to treat patients, hospitals close floors, hospitals close down.
I have Medicare, but
So as y'all can surmise, there are all these cuts being made to very important resources in Puerto Rico. And these are the direct influence of La Junta implementing whatever fiscal plan they have in order to pay back the debt that Puerto Rico owes. All right, so
Vulture hedge.
all right. So now I'm going to talk about the privatization of the electric grid by Luma Energy. So Luma is a private U.S. Canadian company. It's a conglomerate of Quanta and ATCO that was established in July 2021, specifically to obtain the contract to take over the electric grid in Puerto Rico. It replaces PREPA, which was the publicly owned electric company, which was failing. However, the money that could have been used to fix the electric grid was used to give a contract to Luma. So Luma actively is negligent in making repairs to the electric grid. And by repairs, I mean that Luma doesn't complete the expected refurbishing of the electric grid system. Under PREPA, the lack of funding caused this deterioration. But now with the $1.5 billion contract, Luma doesn't fix what they were contracted to fix. So what does that mean? You have disasters like what happened, 2 weeks ago on April 6th. There was a blackout for 3 days because there was an explosion at one of the main electric grid systems. As a result, 8 out of the 73 hospitals had power. The rest of them did not have any power. People had their food spoiled because their refrigerators wasn't working. Some people didn't have, a lot of people didn't have access to water. There was a story that Rafa had told me that there was somebody who needed access to a machine in the hospital, and because the hospital was on their generators, he couldn't get access to machines. I don't know what
The generator wasn't working.
the generator wasn't working. I'm not sure what the fate of this person was, but like it's pretty fucked up that because of Luma, this person wasn't able to get the necessary medical attention that he needed. On the bottom left, there's a map of the power outages according to poweroutages.us. They were, according to this website, on April 6th, almost 350,000 households did not have any power. The vice president of Luma stated que la gente dice en la calle que el servicio está mejorando. No quisiera que una noche de nieve desluzca una primavera hermosa. In English, that means the people in the street are saying the service is getting better. I would not like for one night of snow to disilluminate a beautiful spring. So, I mean, he says that the service is getting better. Luma is also saying that the blackouts aren't being caused by poor maintenance. They're saying that whatever happened was already serviced, so trying to take away blame from themselves. But I checked on the same website that I showed earlier, the US, the power.us, whatever. What was it? Today's 23rd, so yesterday, and there were 6,000 power outages on the island alone. Later on that same day, I couldn't get a screenshot because the page refreshed, but there were like 8,000 later on that same day. So vi que that the servicio está mejorando, is getting better, but we still have 8,000 power outages yesterday. When Luma started, there was a major explosion in one of the main power plants where 400,000 people didn't have power anymore. This is like when they started, like the 10 days after they started, this happened. But it's por la nieve. Luckily, I guess, you know, we love electoral politics. Like, the contract for Luma is being canceled. So Luma was given a 15-year contract with $15 million per year. No, $115 million per year. A member of the PNP said that the Luma contract, he's saying in this quote that we're gonna remove this contract, but it kind of sucks because it's embarrassing that we said before that there's some problems and now we're seeing the problems and it's our fault basically. So the government in Puerto Rico looks dumb stupid right now because they're the ones that advocated for the Luma contract and now they're backtracking saying, oh, well, I guess this wasn't a good idea. And since the institution of this contract, the top 6 executives of Luma make a total salary of $3.5 million, but the president alone makes $1.1 million. There has been 14 countrywide blackouts since its inception. The price of the electric bill has gone up 64%, which is double the average electric bill of in the US. UTIER, which is the electric workers union, were never guaranteed a job to work at Luma. And in fact, they were accused of sabotaging the power plants. And furthermore, Luma had tried to outsource their labor through a union in Florida, thus attempting to engage in union busting campaigns. All right, so a little bit about other workers in Puerto Rico, because with the ed, then the electric workers are the only workers suffering because of La Junta. There is really low salaries, cuts of pensions, and cuts to pensions from public servants like teachers and firefighters. Servers make $2.13 an hour. Teachers make $1,750 a month. Firefighters make $1,500 a month. The median income in the entire island is $20,474, where the cost of living per month is $1,412. If you go by the federal guideline affordability, 30% of your income is what's supposed to be used in order to pay for your expenses. If the cost of living is $1,412 a month and the median income per year is $20,000, it's way more than 30% of your expenses that you have to pay in order to sustain yourself. The rent alone is at least 60% of a teacher's income. And elders are being denied Social Security benefits. There was a news story that came out yesterday that the federal government, the 9 judges, 8 of them said, you know what, Puerto Rico doesn't deserve to have SSI because it doesn't make sense with our constitution, which is bullshit. The only person that voted against it is Sonia Sotomayor, and I guess she probably had to because she's Puerto Rican herself. Here's one more clip. So let me actually, this is out of order. So specifically about the teachers, teachers were starting to strike because of this poor pay. The governor said, well, no one is obligated to be a firefighter or a police officer, and he was insinuating teachers as well. And if you don't like the pay, you can just get a different job. So as a result, they call it the March of Indignation, and here's what it looks like. This is what the teachers ended up doing. So people were pissed, teachers were pissed, as you can see, and Luis said, you know what, all right, I'm gonna give y'all $1,000 raise for the teachers and the firefighters in order to put a pacifier into the masses. However, those funds are temporary as they're coming from FEMA and they're gonna end in July. So give us 3 more months. And we're already pissed, but we're gonna be super pissed again because we're gonna have to face this issue in 3 months. And also, Luis is not addressing anything that has to do with pensions. Teachers are losing their pensions, and because of La Junta and the debt crisis, the pensions are going directly to the debt. So there's that issue as well. Overall, La Junta is causing Puerto Ricans to migrate out of Puerto Rico due to, among other things, which Sin and Edwin will discuss, the unaffordable cost of utilities, as well as the lack of education. That was my piece.
We'll be taking questions a little bit later. I just wanted to throw in, whenever I think about Luma, especially some of us that are in the work of education and in healthcare, We have to understand that when those Luma blackouts have taken place in Puerto Rico, people have died. Many people on dialysis, many people chemotherapy, many people who were on life support have died. And we do not have the ability to hold Luma accountable. The way that contract is set up, if your hospital didn't have a generator, that's your problem. So that's that situation. It's not just that I'm inconvenienced because I don't have my Wi-Fi and my food in my refrigerator is going to rot, and I don't get to watch TV or my cable doesn't work. It's a situation, you know, that's the way we think here where we're at. It's people have died. And any society that doesn't value its teachers, does not value its present, doesn't value its future, doesn't value anything. I want to introduce Sin Rodriguez from la Colectiva Solidaridad. She's going to continue this wonderful discourse. Sin.
Hi, my name is Sin Rodriguez. I'm part of Colectiva Solidaridad, which is a group of Boricuas and allies who are working together to support the communities in the archipelago. Today I'm going to be talking about Act 60 and the gentrification that is going on in Puerto Rico. You probably have heard slogans like "Gringo go home," "Puerto Rico no se vende," "Puerto Rico not for sale," and you've probably heard them from Puerto Ricans who are concerned that the archipelago is being sold to wealthy U.S. investors who have the intention of turning it into their playground. And it's true. There are various efforts taking place in Puerto Rico that are promoting the sale of the land and public resources to reach foreign investors. And among them are the Acts 20 and 22, which are now under the Act 60 Code of Incentives. Back in 2012, in an effort to reduce its debt and stimulate the country's economy, Puerto Rico introduced tax incentives with the goal of encouraging U.S. businesses and investors to relocate to Puerto Rico. They're structured in a way that allows relocating businesses and investors to enjoy significant tax breaks. These tax incentives are Acts 20 and 22. Also known as the Export Service Act, Act 20 was enacted as a means of luring companies to Puerto Rico by offering tax exemptions and credits. Beneficiaries are offered 4% income tax rate, 100% tax exemptions on distributions from earnings and profits, and 90% exemption from personal property taxes to certain types of businesses that relocate to Puerto Rico. To qualify, they must establish a service-based company in Puerto Rico, which services must be provided from Puerto Rico to outside markets. And they need to set up an office in Puerto Rico and hire at least one Puerto Rican worker. That's ridiculous, just one. Qualified to pay only 4% corporate tax, which only applies to any Puerto Rican generated income. Act 22 was enacted with the goal of encouraging high net worth individuals to migrate to Puerto Rico and invest in the local economy. Beneficiaries are offered 100% exemption from income taxes on all dividends, interest, and capital gains. To qualify, they must not have been a resident of Puerto Rico 10 years prior to July 1st, 2019. They need to purchase a property in Puerto Rico that serves as their primary residence, and they need to make a yearly charitable donation of $10,000 and $5,000 of which must go to a government-approved charity. And they need to establish and maintain a bona fide residence. Residence can be established by being physically present in Puerto Rico at least 183 days of every year, which is half of the year. They need to show that Puerto Rico is their tax home and center of their business activity with significant economic connections to the archipelago. For example, just having like an active bank account. And they need to show that they have no closer connections to any other place. Act 20 beneficiaries are not required to establish a residence in Puerto Rico. However, if they don't, they're going to be taxed at the 4% rate, and then taxed again at the rate of 6.5% by the US, which is still significantly lower than what they would pay if they were not receiving the benefits. Act 22 beneficiaries must be bona fide residents of Puerto Rico in order to qualify for the benefits. Act 60, also known as the Code of Incentives, is the Unified Incentive Framework for Puerto Rico. It was signed into law in 2019, and it collects, amends, and or replaces 76 incentives, including Acts 20 and 22, and programs aimed at increasing the economic prosperity of Puerto Rico. Act 60 is divided in 11 chapters and offers incentives for individuals, the exports of goods and services, financial and insurance services, visitor economy, manufacturing and R&D, infrastructure, agriculture, creative industries, entrepreneurship, and more. It's pretty obvious that these acts are damaging for locals. These tax incentives offer some major tax breaks on everything from property, corporate taxes, individual taxes, and banking to non-residents of Puerto Rico if they live in the island for at least half of the year. They don't even apply to most Puerto Ricans. For Act 22, for example, people are only eligible if they hadn't lived in Puerto Rico 10 years prior to July 1st, 2019. Puerto Rican people who can take advantage of these benefits are suffering through austerity measures, including high sales taxes and high cost of goods and services, and the sale of their land and public infrastructure, all the while being treated as second-class citizens without the same rights as elsewhere in the states. These tax incentives were created with the purpose of creating and improving the local economy, but an investigation led by Centro de Periodismo Investigativo revealed that the vast majority of these beneficiaries barely create jobs and represent a minimal impact on the local economy. Among the businesses that they have created are small financial advisory, investment management, or real estate companies, headquartered in residences and apartments. Of the nearly 400 companies identified in the sample, 27% were canceled or dissolved shortly after they were created. There are 115 beneficiaries, or 37% of them, who do not have a business that's registered on their name in Puerto Rico. Moreover, at least 91 resident investors in the sample have family members who also obtained Act 22 decrees in their individual capacity just because they were related to the main investor, without the government knowing that what they invested in if anything. There are retired people and employees of technology, real estate, financial companies, startups, and law firms who moved to the archipelago to work remotely without making major investments and without establishing a business there. In addition to not contributing to the economy, this act promotes the fast gentrification and the sale of property to non-Puerto Ricans. Act 22 investors usually invest in crypto, stock, securities, and real estate. One of the most infamous examples would be Brad Pierce, the child star crypto multimillionaire who has been buying, who has been buying multiple properties in the archipelago, including historic buildings, with the goal of turning Puerto Rico into an utopia for crypto colonizers. Among the properties he has bought, there's a historic building at San Justo Street in Viejo San Juan, where he now operates an NFT gallery with his partner. There's also an old monastery, also located in Viejo San Juan at Calle del Cristo, that he has turned into a mansion. And most recently, he bought the W Hotel in Vieques, which, as many of you know, is a municipality that for decades has been abandoned by the government and is experiencing a humanitarian crisis due to their unreliable transportation system and lack of basic essential resources such as food and healthcare. Areas such as Dorado and San Juan have seen 30 to 50% increases in market prices due to a wave of colonizer businessmen and investors moving from the US. This has promoted the displacement of Puerto Ricans inhabiting these areas, and this gentrification is extending across the archipelago. For example, in the community of Puerto Rico and San Juan, more than 30 properties have been acquired by Act 22 investors, which include Chaim Hassan, Richard Meruelo, Jason Dorset, and Brock Pierce. Some of them practically own entire blocks. And several of these properties have been converted into Airbnbs. Laura Gonzalez, which is an ex-resident of the neighborhood, is one of those affected by the acquisition of entire apartment buildings. In her case, in 2019, she received a notice that in 30 days she had to vacate the apartment in which she resided for years. The building was purchased by Hassan and now has been converted into an Airbnb. Meanwhile, the Public Housing Administration has begun to forcibly evict families from housing complexes in the area of Puerto de Tierra on the pretext that they are going to repair the buildings. The Public Housing Administrator, Alejandro Salgado, delivered a letter to the residents assuring that their eviction would be temporary, but the residents have stated that they promised the same thing to the residents of the public housing complexes of Las Acacias and Old Puerto de Tierra, which were demolished and instead expensive private housing complexes were developed. Not only are Act 22 investors buying tons of property, they now vote in Puerto Rico elections and are pushing local legislators to support their real estate interests and are also supporting the campaigns of current pro-statehood PNPs and pro-colony PFDs. In fact, the top 3 recipients of political donations from wealthy settlers to Puerto Rico in 2019 and 2020 were the current leaders of the pro-statehood party, the PNP, which are Governor Edwin, the Mayor of San Juan, Miguel Romero, and Jennifer Gonzalez, our resident commissioner. The already limited political power that Puerto Ricans have to decide what is best for them is being taken away by US colonizers to serve their own capitalistic interests. While Act 60 is fairly new, this act was created and based on an exploitative system that has existed for more than 100 years, and that exists because of the colonial relationship between the US and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's notorious tax policies throughout the years, which include the Revenue Act of 1921, the tax incentives that were introduced with Operation Bootstrap in the 50s, which Chris talked about earlier, and the IRS section of 936 have allowed the extraction of wealth from the archipelago. Puerto Rico is not only a colony of the United States, it's also a colony of corporations and multi-billionaires. What is clear is that Puerto Rican anchor over the land and the political power that wealthy tax dodgers are acquiring in their motherland is rising. Lowering the tax on the rich does not improve an economy. It only widens the gap between the rich and the rest of the population. And in this case, it's taking power from Puerto Ricans, it's taking the lands from Puerto Ricans, and it's giving it to our colonizers. And this is all that I have for you all today, so thank you so much.
A lot to process. Thank you, Sin. I don't know. Anger, trauma, rage. That's why people are out in the streets in those videos. We're gonna round out our panel with our compañero Edwin Ortiz from Call to Action on Puerto Rico. Edwin.
Thank you. I'm not gonna be as good as they were, so. But let me, also, it's really good to see the new generation. Now, you may not think of yourself as the new generation, but those of us with the real gray hair do think of you as the new generation. It's like really, really good. You know, and not that we had anything to do with your resurgence, you know, but it's just good to see that there's still people who are going to jump in front of the, you know, in front of the barricades. Call to Action formed in 2015. And this was after like a series of meetings that began at 1199. And there were a lot of different folks getting together, deciding it was time to start getting together again. Right? This always happens at certain points where people decide we got to get together. So that was a point where people did get together, and and like always happens, some groups form and do good work, others, don't necessarily get formed, but that was our moment, right? So we formed Call to Action, and it was formed by different types of people coming in from Puerto Rico, people based really here in the United States. I was active with the New York City Congress, Puerto Rican Rights. I remember that one. That formed after the National Congress of Puerto Rican Rights, which is a very important group, just stopped being active. So and there were a lot of things that we were about, but there were like three things to us, which was like really very important. First, that independence is the answer to what's going on in Puerto Rico. It's not the panacea. It's not going to resolve all the issues 5 minutes after independence comes up, but the real way to resolve your own problems is to have control over your life to the extent that you can, right? So independence is the way, and we're past decolonization. We're past talking about needing to be decolonized, and we're past talking about needing to have sovereignty, right? We're talking about independence is the answer. It also has to be on the basis of international law, right? Resolution 1512 of the United Nations. Not that the United Nations is the be all and end all of everything, right? But there's got to be a solid basis, and that's international law. And the third thing that always pops up in my mind is the thing about the U.S. political system, meaning the political parties and elections and so on and so forth. There are a lot of good people in the United States who feel they do a lot of good work, and they do a lot of good work, in their way, in the way they think they should be doing it, right? And their ways they get involved in local democratic politics. And I say democratic politics because from us, it's going to be at least Democratic. From our people, it's going to be the Democratic Party, right? Unless you're in Miami. Not that, and it's not because it's Miami, but it's a whole other story. And there are people who do good things because of the work they do electorally, right? And that's fine. But one of the things, and I get this, I didn't think of this on my own. Una compañera Nora was the one who said this at a meeting, and then I realized it's totally correct. The Democratic Party is not the friend of Puerto Rico. It is not.
Really?
Right? We know that. And no matter how you dress it up, the Democratic Party, and no matter Grijalva, the chair of the National Resources Committee, it makes for a good copy in Puerto Rico that he's a Democratic liberal and this and that and the other, and they're considering legislation by Nidia Velázquez and Ocasio-Cortez. A lot of us wondered about Ocasio-Cortez, and would she be an actual friend of Puerto Rico and be willing to get involved in the real issues? But that answer came when she came up with this legislation with Nidia Velázquez. I could even have accepted a statement that it's got to stop. I don't know how we got to do it or whatever, but it's this nonsense. It's got to stop. Let's do it. No, we got to do another referendum, and we have to have the U.S. as a consultant to the people who run the referendums in Puerto Rico. So, Democratic Party is not Puerto Rico's friend. So that was the basis of ours. Now, in terms of some of the stuff that I wanted to bring out, basically like a list of observations, like that diaspora, right? It's like, what is a diaspora thing, for example? It's really important for us to get to the issue of what is a diaspora and how to approach it, right? Because the diaspora isn't simply those of us who are here and believe in Puerto Rican independence, right? There are people who are here from Puerto Rico for one reason or another. And this doesn't get talked about, but the political repression that a lot of people experience, right, bring them here. Yeah. And this is historical. There's nothing new about that. That's happened for decades. And it's people who came here just because they wanted to get better jobs. My family did that, and they were lucky. They came in during the period when there were jobs. Like my father became like a jeweler. He worked in the factory, in the diamond district. They talk about the diamond district. Then now, I don't know who it is now. I think maybe it's Hondurans. But Puerto Ricans were the ones that were working in all of the workshops, working on all the rings, all the fancy jewelry that people bought. It's like stuff that people were just like tossing around and working on them before the money people put in the diamonds. And my mother became a beautician. So there were a group of people who came in and did okay, right? But then other people who came in and didn't do okay. But now, the thing about the diaspora is who is the diaspora? The diaspora also includes our people who might think of themselves as Puerto Rican the way Irish Americans might think of themselves as Irish Americans, right? And by that, they don't mean I come from Ireland, right? So a lot of our people say, well, I'm Puerto Rican, but not in the sense that some of us might be, right? And I was born here, and I'll say that I'm from Puerto Rico. So that's something that we have to deal with, right? Because a lot of our people have made the decision, maybe not consciously, that they're not Puerto Ricanos per se. They're they're Puerto Rican Americans, right? And I think we all understand that concept. We're Puerto Rican Americans, and we're proud to serve in the armed forces. We want to become lawyers. We want to become this. We want to become that. Those are the people who are also going to get involved in making decisions about Puerto Rico if and when the time comes, right? Because a lot of us talk about having people in the diaspora involved in the efforts to get to independence, right? Are people in the diaspora going to be able to vote in any mechanism that we think that gets set up that we can approve, right? And this has been talked about for years. Well, a lot of our people who, if that happens, a lot of our people are stateholders, and it's not because they're PNPs. It's because from their frame of reference, statehood is decolonization, right? I have this argument with my family all the time. I have a lot of cousins. I think I've converted like maybe a couple to independence. And the first thing they say about Puerto Rico is, well, it should become a state. When I say why? Well, because then their rights get respected, this and that and the other, except we know what happens when you try and assert your rights in New York City. The cops don't necessarily respect your rights. So the fact that, you're covered by the Constitution doesn't necessarily help you. So, and then we talk about what happens in Puerto Rico, and it's like people in Puerto Rico dream in Spanish, right? A lot of us here who call ourselves Puerto Ricans dream in English. That's the difference. And then finally, that actually helps people visualize what I'm talking about to them, at least my family, we do it. And these are the people like my cousins who are the ones, some of them I think would be fine if they got involved. Some of them I'd be afraid if they got involved in that decision making, but I don't know where they're going to fall, right? So it behooves those of us in the diaspora who believe in independence to help educate the other part of the diaspora, right? And it's not everybody's going to be ill-meaning towards the island, right? But right now people talk about this stuff about what's happening with the junta. I mean, I can't believe, like, I had my aunt saying, yeah, they need somebody to come in and straighten out the finances, right? Because they can't do it themselves. And we would have these discussions back and forth, and we know it's about bill collecting, right? They don't care if people get educated. It's about collecting money off the bonds, right? So that's going to be a struggle that we face. So that's just something I wanted to throw out there. One of the things that we as a diaspora need to do is support the organizations in Puerto Rico. Part of our effort has always been to get involved with groups like the Federación de Maestros de Puerto Rico, the Puerto Rican Teachers Federation, which was actually the union for the teachers until powers to be decided there had to be somebody else, right? So, but that it happened that somebody else also kind of disintegrated because their members didn't realize that they were getting the short end of the stick. So the Federación de Maestros has been one of the prime movers in defending the educational system and the students and the teachers. And very important, a prime mover in trying to prevent the wholesale giveaway of schools, because a lot of these schools are like in neighborhoods that, some of them are in good neighborhoods, some of them maybe they consider not so good neighborhoods, but that at some point will be after gentrification, right? So you've got either you have like the land which needs to be cleared, or you have this complex of buildings, which are actually are in solid condition, but that are being being eroded over time because no one's taking care of them. And when some of these documentaries, you'll see stories about how a lot of these schools are being kept open and used now as community centers. And it's actually become a very real resource for a lot of the people who no longer have jobs in Puerto Rico. So these people got together and said, we need to have a roof over our head. We need a place where everybody can cook communal meals and so on and so forth. Another group that we think it's important to work with, se acabaron las promesas, which I think a lot of us know. And it's another group of younger people and who understand the concept of having to resolve the thing based on the need for independence. And they are part of the group that's always been, I mean, if you've seen some of the demonstrations, especially the ones that were where the police confronted the demonstrators, they've always been like in the front lines of that group. And they've been like very, very consistent. And, it's wearing on them, but they're still in the good fight, and they come over here at different times, especially like in June, which brings us to the other thing that we're involved in is the United Nations activities that take place in June, the decolonization committee meetings. And we always, so far, we've always been able to testify. One of our compañeras, Norma, is going to be slated to speak for us again this year, assuming everything comes together. And we've always held the Day of Solidarity with the Independence of Puerto Rico in June. This year, we're hoping to do it June 18th. We're hoping to do it here. And so we're hoping that works out. We'll get the word out on that. And the idea with that is, bring people together from the diaspora, but also together with people from the archipelago who come in to deal with the United Nations stuff that goes on. And we've come together and had people, compare notes and talk about what's going on in both areas. Let me see. Yeah, and the last subject that I really want to talk about is, I don't have the answer to how Puerto Rico is going to become independent, right? But really, part of the answer lies in how do we get the people in Puerto Rico to move to independence? One of the things that had to do with the referendums and the electoral work that's been done over there is very, very clear. People are no longer supporting the electoral system the way they used to. Now, they may not call themselves independence folks, but they're not going to vote anymore. Or if they're going to vote, they're voting for somebody else other than the two political parties. And in the referendums, it's always been clear. We're all still arguing about it, right? But a long time ago, the folks decided the status quo just wasn't desirable anymore. This thing with the Popular Democratic Party and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico is gone from their point of view as something that is positive for their lives, right? And to this day, the Popular Democratic Party just doesn't know how to deal with it, right? Because as we know, these political parties exist to take advantage of the money that gets pumped in by the federal government and by businesses, right? So, and people have become disillusioned with the whole concept of statehood. And it's not just because a lot of people have moved over to Miami. Sometimes we joke about that stuff, but people have been moving over to Miami. So of course, now the Democratic Party in Florida and the United States, all of a sudden they know that about Puerto Rico now, right? Because they need Florida to win the presidency, which actually doesn't help them win the presidency. So they should have dealt with that a long time ago. But everybody knows as well that the stateholders, just can't run the government either. And they're not there to be true ideologues, right? It's one thing for you to say, I think we should become a state because we're going to be equal, it's this, that, and the other. But when was the last time you met a martyr or heard about a martyr for statehood? And I'm not trying to be facetious about that, right? Where are the Lolita Lebrons of the statehood movement?
Oh, God.
right? Seriously, where are the hospital of the statehood movement? Where are the people chaining themselves to the gates of the U.S. federal court system saying, we're not going to participate in your grand juries until you make us a state. We're not going to pay whatever taxes we owe you. And there are people who do pay federal taxes. We won't pay taxes until you make us a state. Where are those people? And the government doesn't care because they get from the stateholders what they want without it being the state. And I think people have come to realize that. Yeah, Luisi, in the old days, the insular government used to actually administer the government, There was a time when actually the insular government had some efficiencies to it, but not anymore. They're there to earn their salaries. The federal government runs everything. Most of the money that's pumped into the budget is the federal money, right? So the people they have to talk to are the representatives of the agencies who run the island. So, and the last thing I'm going to say about this is that, people have been showing their support for independence by voting for the Popular Independence Party, regardless of how we might feel about how that plays out. They're the ones who are sticking their necks out in public and saying, vote for me because I'm for independence. And people have responded to them. Unfortunately, a lot have also responded to El Movimiento Victoria Ciudadano, whose claim to fame is, I'm against the two political parties, but I'm not into the status issue, right? And at some point, people are going to realize what that's about. Some of them are very well-meaning, but as a movement, it's not a movement for advancement. But the PIP has actually increased its vote share, which means that people are willing to work with them, or at the very least, they're willing to admit what they've always felt, right? Because there are a lot of closet independentistas in Puerto Rico. They're just people who don't want to say it. And part of that, of course, has to do with repression, right? And that's another thing that doesn't get talked about, but people know about it. To this day, people do what my abuelita did back in the early 70s or 60s when I would ask her about independence, right? And this is someone who was in that generation who would shut the doors and the windows at 7 o'clock, right? Because when she was young, you had to close up the house because of the sabandija that would come in, the animals would just come into your house if it was wide open. But even then, when I would ask her about Pedro Albizu Campos, she would whisper, and I eventually found out because when people heard you talking about that, there was a good chance you'd get reported. And it wasn't that people were afraid of independentistas or Partido Nacionalista. They were afraid of what would happen if they thought you were a member of the Partido Nacionalista, and that's still true today, right? So one of the things that we have to help people get past is the fear of the retribution. It's not easy because they will come after you, right? They will come after us if they think we're a very serious threat. So ultimately, I think it's going to be a question: how do we move people to the point where they're willing to say, "I want to be independent," right? Okay, I've opted for. We need to be decolonized, and yes, we need sovereignty, right? So, like when Ricky Martin gets up on a truck and waves a Puerto Rican flag and says, "Yes, we need better government," how do we get people to say to him, "Yeah, but where do you stand on independence?" Right? Again, all these, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be unkind, up to Miami, but all these entertainers move to Miami, and then come back and say, yeah, I live in, make believe they live in Puerto Rico. That's cool, but when that happens, people are going to start realizing that the change is going to come, and I think it will come despite everything that's happened. So anyway, I think that's it for me. Que viva Puerto Rico libre.
Folks, you're going to take some questions. And again, let me define what a question is. A question is an inquiry that is made that ends with a question mark. And I do that because oftentimes I have a question and then 15 minutes after their whole sermon that they've given, then they end with a question. So I really want folks to, we're gonna have some dialogue. We're gonna take a 10-second pivot. 10-second pivot. I wanted to call our sister Shanice here from the Venceremos Brigade. Let's go.